And here we go. I'm going to admit everyone now, and they're on mute.
Okay.
All right. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight for another lifelong learning lecture. We are very pleased to have with us once again Jerome Burke. Jerome is director of the Center for Inclusive Excellence at Framingham State University, and he's here tonight to talk to us about global fluency, speaking the language of cultural competence in business. Now, there's just a few programming notes before we get started. First, if you haven't noticed already, you've been brought in on mute, and I'm going to ask that you please keep yourself muted throughout this talk to avoid any unintended interruptions. You are welcome to take yourself off mute if you'd like to ask a question at the end of Jerome's talk. I will be dropping into the chat a link to our evaluation form, and we welcome any feedback you have about tonight's lecture and any suggestions you have for future lectures. We'd love to hear them. Q&A, as I alluded to before, will be either take yourself off mute at the end of this talk and ask your question. We do ask that you just raise your hand first, or if you feel more comfortable, please feel free to drop your questions into the chat. And with that, it's my great pleasure to welcome Jerome Burke.
Thank you so much, and good evening, everyone. I'm hoping that we're all doing great. I hope that we're staying warm and dry and all those wonderful things. I'm hoping that people would have had dinner already, and if not, I'm hoping that you're planning to have something great to eat after this talk. What I would say about this presentation, this came out of a conversation or a presentation that I made to a group of business students, some of our students who were from the Department of Business on our campus. But for me, I found the preparation of it to be quite interesting, right? Because I would have done spaces or do talks around like cultural competence and talking about that, right? But this presentation had me reflecting in terms of what it is we're setting up our students to do when it is that they leave Framingham, right? How it is that we're making sure that they are able to thrive in the global world, right? And that's very, very much important because if you drill down on the reason why one try to attain a higher education, right? It's really because they want to set up themselves to be very marketable in the working world, right? I think that's a fair assessment, whether or not it could be for self-actualization. I know there may be a multiple reason why one seek out higher education, right? But at the core, there's some part. I'm hearing echo. All right. So there's some part of it that is linked to wanting to thrive in the work world. So that was the spirit of this presentation and the idea behind this talk that we're going to be having this evening. One of the things I would also like to say about this presentation, I don't think I'm going to be saying or sharing anything that is going to be absolutely novel. I like to think that this is going to be a refresher. I like to think that this is going to maybe connect some of the different DEI space talks that we would have had already, or some of the spaces that we would have been in. But what I think, what I like to do with my presentation is to root them in some data. I know with the first talk that we had when we talk about banned books, right? A lot of that I tried to make sure that there was data support and there was evidence talking about why it is that what it is that we saw with the books that were being banned. And similarly, I wanted to use data to kind of support my presentation today because a lot of time when people look at the work of DEI, there's a lot of emotions that attach to it, right? And that's fair because we're dealing with people, we're dealing with real life situation when you think about diversity, equity, and inclusion work, right? But as a way to push back, as a way to make sure that persons are understanding why it's important, I think data should be a part of that. So what I'm hoping to achieve today, let me see. Trying to, okay. So the goals for today talk will be to develop an understanding of the importance of cultural competence, also to develop essential skills for navigating cross-cultural interactions, effectively, including communication, empathy, and adaptability, and offer practical strategies and tips to apply to cultural competency in the real world and in business scenarios. What is culture, right? And I like to start at the very, very basic, with a very, very basic question, right? And the definition that I like to use when I'm looking at culture is one that comes from Terry L. Cross, and it says that culture is an integrated pattern of human behaviors that include thoughts, communications, actions, customs, beliefs, values, and institution of racial, ethnic, religious, or social group, right? So when you're talking about culture, it's why I like this definition is because it talks about the integrated pattern, like all of those things coming together, right, to create one culture, right? And what is so interesting about culture is like for me, if you were to ask me, if you were to like, oh, Jerome, what does culture mean to you, right? Being a Jamaican, I'm gonna talk about Bob Marley. I'm gonna talk about rum. I'm definitely gonna throw some jerk chicken into that, right? So those are some of the things that you will hear if I'm supposed to talk about culture. If I was to ask someone who's maybe from New York, right? Maybe they will talk a little bit about more Broadway. Maybe you will hear them talk about Jay-Z or something, right? And from time to time, even when persons are living in the same country, right? I'm sure if I was to ask someone who is from down south, maybe someone from Texas, about culture, right? You'll maybe hear more about cowboy music, that type of thing, right? So even when we're living in the same country, sometimes we experience culture differently. So some of the general terms when we look at culture, some of the we're looking at language, right? For me, I Jamaica predominantly speak English, right? But I also know Jamaican patois. So, if you ever come to Jamaica, the Wagwan, and then from different parishes in Jamaica, our patois and our dialect is different, right? So I'm able to, whenever I'm on campus, there are about five of us who are Jamaicans, and I get so excited when I'm around my other colleagues who are also from Jamaica. I break out into my patois, and I feel so, a sense of belonging, right? Whenever I'm able to do that, and I can only. And you see that also with our students, right? You see that when with our students as they navigate different spaces, when you're interacting with them, and as soon as they're able to interact with one of their friends and they're able to maybe speak Spanish or French or whatever their languages from their country, you can see that there's a sense of pride and ownership that comes with that. Right? We're also looking at traditions and rituals, beliefs and values, and I will just run through some of these pretty fast. Um, okay, there's arts and music. There's cuisine, as I mentioned. I like to talk about cuisine. I'm a foodie. History and heritage, religion and spirituality, fashion and clothing, cultural symbols. All right, let me try to go back a little. Right. Just an example of how it is that culture is important, and even how it shows up on campus, even with the work that I do, right? So I work in the Center for Inclusive Excellence. That's a space on campus, a physical space on campus that is dedicated to DEI work, right? So as FSU taught about being an anti-racist institution and an institution that is serious about DEI work, they created a physical space dedicated to that, right? Last semester, our students, a set of our students, they formed the Muslim Student Association, right? After a year long of work, they finally created and formed the club, right? The students also started lobbying to find a space for prayer, right? I know for those who, I don't know a lot, but if there's anyone on the meeting link this evening that knows more about the Muslim faith and practices, right? Our Muslim community, they pray more often than our Christian community. That's something that we can agree on, right? So the students, they came to me and they were like, hey, we're having challenge in terms of finding prayer spaces on campus. They started utilizing a space in the CIE, right? But with that, based on how the CIE is set up, right, we often have meetings, we have presentations, and the students, they came to me and be like, hey, this is not working for us. We need a space that is dedicated to that, right? And you will see how it comes up in different aspects of this presentation, right? at some point you might have felt like, hey, this is a CIE. Why do I need to take that on my head? Go find somewhere else, blah, blah, blah. Right. Sometimes you think that that's the get out, right? But the minute I was able to sit, with three of the students, they actually showed up to my office. They sat and they said, Jerome, we appreciate the fact that you have said that this is a space that we can use. But as we think about an actual prior space, these are the things that we would want, right? One, the space that we're currently in, we would like for it to be removed from the system where it's no longer able to be booked for other purposes outside of maybe prayer and meditation, right? They also said to me there were certain art pieces in the space that had faces, right? A general space that they pray in, normally these art pieces should not have like faces and those types of symbols. So that for me, right? I went in saying, oh, I'm giving you a space and that's it, right? Good. I'm done. Wash my hand. I did my part, right? But there was a lot more for me to learn about what that entails. So I just want us to know that even when we're interacting with persons from different backgrounds and different culture, it's going to be a continuous process of learning, right? And I also want to say that even for persons who are committed to doing this work, um, there has to be a part of it that we're committing ourselves to lifelong learning and being open to that. I'm not sure how many of us is familiar with this, the cultural iceberg image, right? So when we think about culture, I mentioned some of the things that are very surface level. And when you think about an iceberg, there's what you see on the top, and people might say, "Oh, that is grand," but generally it goes way, way down. It's much deeper. So there's a lot. When we think about culture, there's a lot that we don't understand, that we don't see, and that's where sometimes we run into the issues. What is global fluency? So for me, as I thought about this presentation, the first time I was doing it with the business students, right? I was thinking, what if there was a way that despite I speaking patois, someone speaking Spanish, someone speaking French, majority of our students going into the business world speaking English. What if there's and then they want to be marketable in any arena, in any space, because there's opportunity to work online, right? A lot of students are now able to work online. You pull up your computer from anywhere and you could be doing a job you're with a team that is in India, a team that is in Spain, right? That's the reality of the world that we live in today, right? How it is that how are we setting up our students, how are we setting up our clients, those that we're interacting, those that we're training, and even ourselves, how are we positioning ourselves that we can, outside not being able to speak another language, how is it that we're able to relate to other people? Is there a thing such as global fluency, right? And there is. I really believe that there is. And it says that is the ability to understand, adapt to, and effectively communicate across different cultural contexts. It involves an awareness of cultural differences, an openness to diverse perspectives, and the ability to navigate complex global interaction with sensitivity and adaptability, right? So, in other words, it's saying that I know that there are differences. I'm very, very much aware that I may be different from the person that I'm interacting with. But I believe that through that difference, there's an opportunity, and I am embracing that. I am leaning into that, right? And that's one of the things that um, I'm hoping to get across this evening. I'm not sure how much of us is familiar with the term cultural competence, but it's rooted in a lot of the work that we do in my department, right? And so cultural competence refers to the ability to effectively interact with people from diverse cultural backgrounds, understand and respect their perspectives and values, and communicate in a way that is sensitive to their cultural beliefs and practices, right? One of the things I like to mention when we're talking about cultural competence is that while it is that we're encouraging individuals to recognize differences, right? We're encouraging individuals to work with others who they may think they have nothing in common with, right? Um, the notion is never to compromise one's own beliefs, right? So when you think about even the work that I do in the CIE, I have a group of student workers, right? And one of the beauty of the four students that I work with is that they're attached to different religious faiths, right? And just to see these students on a daily basis, like working and connecting with each other and supporting each other. Last I think it was on Tuesday. One of our the president of the Muslim Student Association, which is one of my student worker. He was working on an iftar, right? And he was putting that together, like organizing it, right? His name is Timur. And with Timur putting that together and creating the space, one of our next student worker, Yair, is Jewish. And they were working to create that space together just to make sure that Timur and his for is the space was ready, right? So right, Yair worked with him, put that space together. I know Yair left and everything, right? But it's that opportunity that I can work with you, I can allow you to succeed without compromising my own beliefs, right? And that's the core of what we try to achieve when we're talking about cultural competence. So I know a lot of time people, the thing is that people are like, oh, if I work with someone who has different cultural beliefs, if I'm a Christian and I'm connecting with someone who is a member of the LGBTQ community, what does that mean for me, right? And this is something that these are questions that we have to be prepared to answer should our students ask these are those that we're interacting with, right? And you should be able to say to them, hey, I hear you. I understand what you're saying, right? Your faith tell you this, your beliefs tell you this, your rituals require you doing this, right? So we're not asking you to compromise those, right? We're asking you to appreciate the context of the world that you will have to thrive and work in today. And these are some of the things that you'll be required to do. All right. So what are the benefits of cultural competence in the workplace, right? Why are we talking about this? How is this beneficial to me when I'm um, in my work world? What always is going to benefit me as a supervisor, as a manager, as an entrepreneur? Why is it that I should encourage cultural competence in my space, right? And one of the things that we see is that it enhances communication. It helps professionals to avoid misunderstandings and misinterpretations in a globalized workforce, right? And we're going to drill in on that a little more. It boosts collaboration. It fosters stronger relationship among teams from diverse backgrounds. It increases market reach. Companies that understand cultural nuances can better tailor products and marketing strategies to international markets. It drives innovation. Diverse perspective lead to more creative problem solving and idea generation. And it enhances employee engagement and retention. So example, in a global meeting between US and Indian teams, the US manager expects quick decisions while the Indian team values consensus and needs more time. The US team interprets the Indian team's hesitation as a lack of input, causing frustration and miscommunication. Cultural differences in decision making lead to missed opportunities for collaboration. Understanding these differences could have helped both teams work together more effectively, right? So one of the things that is important for us to understand. I think a lot of times in our roles as managers or supervisor or as team members, if it is that we're so accustomed to things going a particular way, we sometimes don't realize how some of the things that we do on a daily basis are very culturally based, right? Um, I can admit for myself, right, that now coming and working in America, if I showed up to a meeting 5 minutes after the time, I would have missed a lot, right? And coming from Jamaica, generally the first 5, 10 minutes of a meeting, you're interacting, you're asking, "Oh, is your son doing?" Right? My experience with meetings in America, you show if you want to do all that chit chat, you show up an extra 15 minutes because on the hour we're starting and we're getting things rolling, right? So people, you showing up, I walking into a meeting at 8:05 would generally be seen as, oh, Jerome is late. I am in fact late, right? But it's just in terms of that cultural difference and what it is that I was used to and my understanding of what that was like, right? So in terms of when we look at Indian culture that values like collaboration, right? Values that put a lot of heavy emphasis on like eh, around family, right? America, in all fairness, not a bash, just an honest. observation, right, and honest in terms of what research has even shown is that Americans can be very individualistic, right, in terms of um, able to be like, this is how I feel about it, and therefore that's the decision and we're going forward, right? So in terms of when you look at this example and again these cultural nuances, how they show up differently in the workspace. So again, as you think about the teams that the teams and the community and the collaboration that are going to be taking place in your office and in your workspace, what are some of the cultural backgrounds that your team members are showing up with? And therefore, always that impacting the space and impacting the work. And always is that you, as an individual, can play a role in terms of shaping that, right? So okay, so I need something to be done and I need to be done fast, right? So am I creating a space that, okay, as much as it is that I want this to be done fast, I'm therefore availing myself that way a member from my team who's more family oriented can have that access to me for us to talk through it and work through it together, as opposed to you go and do it and just send it to me. Those are some of the things we have to think about. Companies companies embracing cultural competence of a more diverse staff. All right. So, are there any financial benefits to cultural competence, right? So one of the things that we see is that companies, again, with that, what I've just mentioned, companies that are generally more culturally, that embrace cultural competence, we see that they generally have a more diverse staff, right? So what are some of the financial benefits of this? A 2024 study demonstrated a causal relationship between workforce gender diversity and improved financial performance as measured by stock return. This suggesting that companies with greater gender diversity tend to achieve better financial outcomes, right? So again, I like to put these things in perspective as we talk about DEI, we talk about cultural competence, why it is that it's beneficial for a company to really be embracing having a diverse team. Diversity and profitability. Research indicates that companies with diverse teams are more likely to outperform their peers. A study by McKinsey and Company found that organizations in the top quartile for ethnic and cultural diversity were 33% more likely to have industry-leading profitability. If you're an entrepreneur, this should have you absolutely excited about hiring people from diverse background, because there is literature, there is data showing you that when you have a team that is diverse, it leads to an increase in profitability. There's money on the table. And to be fair, who doesn't like money? And that's the part of DEI that I say that I get excited about, right? In terms of when I'm able to use data to say, this is why this makes sense. As much as you're hearing the noise and all that is happening, there's data that supports the work that we do. And for anyone who loves higher ed, anyone who loves research, you know that data, and you get excited when you see that there's actual numbers that support this. One of the things that I found in terms of some examples, Google, right? Their profit, they made 59.97 billion in 2023 from their revenue. So Google is committed, and Google stated Google is committed to diversity with a global workforce representing over 100 countries. 33.9% of their workforce is from underrepresented groups, right? So again, when you think about these big major groups, right? These major organizations that are being committed to diversity and being committed to having persons from diverse backgrounds and working with persons from countries and globally. Why? Why are they doing that, right? And the truth is, while we would love, while we would love to say that, oh, it's because they care and it's their corporate social responsibility and all those good and feel good things, right? The truth is, they know that there is money in this. They know that it will affect their profitability. Apple, 99.8 billion in 2023. They report that 54% of their global workforce is racially or ethnically diverse, and their leadership team includes 34% of women. They have programs supporting employees from different culture and gender backgrounds. Johnson and Johnson. 20.7 billion in 2023. Johnson & Johnson have a diverse global workforce with 45% of their work with their US workforce identified as a racial or ethnic minority group. And as a task, I would encourage you, go and look at some of the top performing companies in the world, right? And also try to see if you can find their staff complement in terms of their identity, right? Why are these companies performing so well, right? There must be something there. And again, there a lot of research has been done. While it may not be a correlation, but it a direct correlation. A lot of persons actually believe, and a lot of study believe that there is a relation between having a diverse team and the profit these companies make. Um, I think this is in keeping with what we were mentioning earlier, the financial benefit and some examples, more examples as well. Employee satisfaction and retention, recognition for community companies that prioritize diversity and community engagement often see higher employee satisfaction, right? For instance, People Magazine 100 Companies That Care list in 2024 featured organizations like Cisco and Hilton recognized for their commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, which in turn fosters a positive work environment. So, are what are we seeing in terms of companies that are committed to making cultural competence a part of their identity, a part of their work, right? Even if they're not calling it that, right? But they are doing at their core, they are making sure that their programs, they're built into their HR roles and functions, right? We're seeing that there's a higher level of employee satisfaction and by and large retention, right? And anyone can tell you, for us who work in higher ed, we drill on retention and persistency, right? We want persons to stay at the institution, right? In terms of our students, we want them to stay and eventually graduate. But even in terms of our faculty and staff, right? And anyone, if there's anyone here from HR or ever been a part of a search committee, they can tell you it's expensive. It's absolutely expensive. So it's better to get someone in and put policies in place, put programs in place that you're able to keep and maintain your staff. Because again, otherwise it's an expensive venture, right? And I know that this is not generally how we approach DEI, right? But I want to say that these are some of the conversations that we have to have and be honest about it in terms of there is a way to show that DEI does affect your profitability and your bottom line, right? And we are able to see that. Market expansion, understanding diverse markets. Cultural competent companies can better understand and penetrate diverse markets, leading to increased revenue streams. For example, tailoring products and marketing strategies to meet the cultural preferences of different consumer groups and can result in higher sales and customer loyalty, right? So McDonald's, an example of market expansion, McDonald's has been recognized for adapting its menu to local tastes around the world. For instance, in India, where a significant portion of the population doesn't eat beef or pork for religious reasons, McDonald's introduced the Makalo Tiki, and if I'm not pronouncing that well, see with me, burger, which is made with potato patty. Similarly, in Japan, they offer the teriyaki burger to cater to the local flavor. So what are we seeing these companies doing, right? So is McDonald's in America showing up the same way all around the world? No, right? Because for them to work, for them to expand, they also have to think about the culture that they're now operating in, right? They have to think about the space that they're operating in. And making sure that even their very menu is reflecting of that, right? One of the things that people oftentimes talk about is if you're from the Caribbean, is which Caribbean country has like the best KFC, right? I dare say it's Jamaica, but right, there's literally if you at the end of this, if you go on YouTube and type in, does Jamaica have the best KFC? There have been a bunch of persons who have actually visited Jamaica and they compare it like to taste the Jamaican KFC, and they will travel to other countries in the world and compare them. Why? Because even though we talk about these spices and these secret spices. The truth is that seemingly it's known, right, in the spirit of Game of Thrones, it is known that the seasons are used, right? The seasons that are used are pulled from those local countries, right? That way it can reflect, and the consumers are more likely to engage with the product. It's similar, it's what they know, right? And in the context of when you think about even McDonald's, right, saying that when they go to India, just being very much aware, right, of the market that they're dealing with. And when I think about like beef and pork, and that's something that is not necessarily um eat as it's not a main part of their diet. They have to adapt to that, right? So are you gonna show up, and as an entrepreneur, as a business, right? Are you gonna just show up with the same, right? This is how I have it, and I'm not willing to change, and I'm gonna show up in your space, and you're gonna have to use it that way, right? You can, but the likelihood of you succeeding and thriving, right, then becomes extremely difficult, if not also impossible. So some of the times too, right, why are some of these companies, well, while they do particular well in a particular country, when they uproot and go to other spaces, why are they not also thriving and doing so well, right? And maybe it's because of their unwillingness to adapt, right, to these cultural differences. Coca-Cola has demonstrated cultural competence by tailoring its marketing campaigns to resonate with various regional cultures. One famous example is the Share a Coke campaign, where Coca-Cola replaced its logo with popular names in different markets, creating a personalized and culturally relevant connection with consumers. This personalized approach helped Coca-Cola increase sales in multiple countries, showing that the understanding and catering to diverse cultural preferences can lead to a higher engagement and sales. I'm not sure if anyone is familiar with the Share a Coke campaign, right? Where Coca-Cola pretty much had people's name on their bottles are in the corks, right? So you would literally go and search to see if you can find your name, right? Or if your friend found your name, they would like send a picture to you. So you were excited about buying Coca-Cola, right? But what Coca-Cola did, which was smart, as they had these their bottles and are their juices in different countries, they had to identify what were the names that were popular in India, what were the names that were popular in Spain, right? What were the names that were popular in America? So you can't, because again, those were not necessarily the same names from country to country. So to make sure that this campaign was relevant and was culturally relevant in each space, they had to do some research around that for engagement and sales. Some other examples, regional flavor variation. Mexico, Coca-Cola offers Coca-Cola made with real sugar cane, known as the Mexican Coke, which has become a popular version among consumers, particularly in North America, due to its distinct taste compared to high fructose corn, right? So even with that, even with the taste and what is used to make Coke in different countries, right? That's something that research has gone into. India, Coca-Cola introduced a variation called Coca-Cola Thumbs Up, a stronger, spicier Coca-Cola that is more aligned with Indian market preference for bold and intense flavor, right? So I may hear Coca-Cola that is spicy, and I'm like, what's that? Right? But someone who is from Indian background be like, what's that? All right, a total different level of enthusiasm and excitement towards that. Marketing campaigns tailored to local traditions. Middle East, in Muslim majority countries, Coca-Cola runs Ramadan specific campaigns where they emphasize themes of sharing, community, and togetherness, important values during the holy month of Ramadan. So, right, so even as you think about the way that you market your product during particular times, that's something that brands have done, right? Just making sure that they're remaining culturally relevant, right? And that's something that we have to do in our spaces as well. Um, I can remember my previous job in Jamaica. I worked at Jamaica Aid Support for Life, right? We it's so interesting talking about it. So we get funding from USAID, USAID, and we know all that is happening with USAID these days. But we got funding to do some work around HIV prevention, right? And we had to come up with a campaign. Um, And as we were there and we're thinking about like what is it, what could be a great name for the campaign, what's something that would be catchy and relevant to what we're talking about, right? And somebody said, and they said, do something called Do It Safe, right? And that's DOI safe, SAFE, right? But as I thought about that, I was like, how could we make this like, how could we Jamaicanize this? And it in Jamaica, instead of say do it, we said do it, right? Which is DWEET, right? So we made it into one thing, do it safe, right? So even things like those, right? Just making sure that we are trying things that are culturally relevant. It's making an impact in terms of how it is that we're still making that connection. Those are some of the things that we have to think about as well. Why is cultural competence important? Demographic shifts and an increasingly diverse population to combat hate crimes and discrimination. It prepares you to thrive in the global world, improve communication and collaboration in multicultural teams. The one that I will be looking at for the purpose of time is demographic shifts and an increasingly diverse population. Past and present diversity. What is it that we're seeing in the US right now? As of 2020, the US Census Bureau reported that 76.3% of the US population identify as white, non-Hispanic, down from 83.3 in 1990, indicating a growing racial and ethnic diversity. Right, that was 2020. Hispanic population growth. The Hispanic population in the US increased from 22.4 million in 1990 to 62.1 million in 2020, making up 18.7 of the total population compared to 9% in 1990. The Asian American growth, the Asian population in the US grew from 7.6 million in 2000 to 19.9 million, right? Multiracial population 2020 census revealed that 10.2 million people identify as multiracial, a 2000, 276% increase since 2000. So why is this important? America is becoming more and more diverse, right? So as you think about, and I say and this is why businesses, they're very much aware of this, right? When you think about Samsung, Coca-Cola, all those brands, right? They are very, very much aware of this. Are we aware of this in our workspace, right? Are we looking at the fact that, hey, my coworkers, right? My team is becoming more diverse. Am I preparing for that, right? The information is there. Are we preparing for that? These companies, they are preparing and they're using this to their advantage. What about us? What are we doing with this data, right? How it is that we're using this data to make sure that we're in a position to thrive, a position of readiness, right? When I look at my institution, we talk about Framingham State University. We're on the verge of becoming what we call an Hispanic serving institution. What does that mean, right? Are we preparing for this? Are we really getting excited about this and putting in the work to deal with that as our campus become more and more diverse, right? We can't just see these things happening and not prepare for it, right? Because we spoke about retention. When people show up to a space and you're like, hey, come, we want you to be here. And I do show up, right? But you're not in fact inclusive, right? The programs, the policies does not reflect my identity. It does not reflect my culture, right? I'm not gonna stay. And that's just the truth. Just think about the spaces that you feel like you're, even if you do stay, right? Just think about the spaces that you feel like you thrive in. Those are the spaces that you have some sense of belonging. There's something there, or things, or individuals that you feel connected to. Future projections by 2025, it's projected that people of color will constitute 50.2 of the US population, with the white non-Hispanic population declining to 49.8. And I think the term for this is the major minority, right? Someone may be able to explain that a little bit better than I can, but that's the general term from youth diversity. According to the US Census Bureau, 49% of children under 18 are from diverse racial and ethnic backgrounds, right? Aging population, the US Census Bureau projects that by 2030, all baby boomers will be over the age of 65, and urban versus rural. A Pew Research report showed that urban areas are becoming more diverse. All right. So Oh wow, I'm at the end already. But all of I pretty much went through all of that to show in terms of in terms of looking at the relevance of cultural competence in our business, in the world of work, in the world of business, right? And showing that when it is that we are deliberate about cultural competence, when we're deliberate about making our spaces and our work world more diverse, there's actual financial benefit, right? Um, and one of the reasons why this was important, right? Again, just talking about why it is that I originally did this presentation was to have this talk with our business students, right? And I start encouraging them to say, hey, as you go out into the world of being managers, you're going to be in the positions of being able to employ individuals. Don't use that. Don't be scared of not being able to say, hey, I feel like our language, there's going to be a language barrier. I feel like I'm not going to understand you. I feel like I don't know anything about your culture, right? It's an opportunity to learn. And again, even for those of us who are in this area of work, I can tell you a million different stories of times that I just did not know, but the opportunity came for me to learn. The opportunity came for me to sit across from someone and say, hey, what does that mean? Explain that to me, right? And being willing and comfortable with that, being at a place where you're very, very comfortable to say, I just don't know. So explain that to me, right? Um, and I like this quote, strength lies in differences, not in similarities. All right. Not sure if there are any questions. If there are, or comments, I would take them at this time.
Thank you so much, Jerome. And yes, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to raise your hand and I can take you off of mute. And Jerome, while we're waiting, I do have a question for you.
Sure.
Um, in general, are there areas when it comes to cultural competence that you think American companies do better in, and areas that where we could really need improvement?
Yes, I think there's a slide that does this for us. Where's that? I think it's the one. Okay. Right. I think to answer your question, I would go and look at the cultural iceberg, right?
Mhm.
So I think for companies or individuals, they're generally good at finding ways to connect around language, food, and clothing, and those things that are very surface level, if you want to describe it as that, right? But I think the part that when it now requires you drilling down, understanding, hey, why it is disrespectful to just um, take certain of my beliefs and just put it in an ad, right? Why it's so disrespectful to think that certain gestures can be used as a form of sketch or just for humor, right? I think that's the part that's sometimes very difficult, right? So again, when I think about culture, those that are on the surface that we all can easily identify, I think companies oftentimes latch onto those, right? And sometimes they're able to do a good job around those. But those that are more rooted, right? Those are the part that oftentimes companies have a lot of difficulties dealing with, right? So I would answer that by saying that, and also encourage us then in our own space as we think about building our own cultural competence, right? As we're thinking about the work that we are doing, how it is that we're doing, drilling down and doing more research and making sure that we're connecting with members of these communities, right? As we try to bridge those cultural divides, how it is that we're actually being collaborative. And that, again, that is why DEI work is so important. How it is that we're actually bringing people to the table to be like, hey, I got this project, I got this funding, right? For some reason, it worked out. But I want to make sure that it's authentic. I want to make sure that it's done correctly. Bring someone in or individuals in, do the research, right? Get members of the community and from uh, to actually be a part of that decision making.
Mhm. All right. And I'm kind of curious too, when we talk about cultural competence, There's the obvious ethnic and racial minorities and majorities, but what about class? Does that play a role in cultural
Yeah.
competence?
I would say yes, because one of the things that we have to understand when you talk about what is it, Kimberly Kinshaw, she talks a lot about like intersectionality, right?
Mhm.
So even if class by itself, right, we have to think about it in context of like um the intersectionalities of that, right? So when you think about one's wealth, when you think about I'm a black man, but I'm from a particular community, how it is that I navigate certain spaces, right? So those are some of the things that also shows up when we're looking at cultural competence. So I would say yes to that.
Mhm. Okay, great. And I invite anyone who's got a question to take themselves off mute if they'd like to ask one. Otherwise, I'm going to give us all 15 minutes back. And Jerome, I hope you get to the next place you wanted to go.
I want to take this opportunity to say thank you all for deciding that you wanted to come and share this space with us this evening. I hope that this was a refresher. I hope that you would have learned something along the way. I'm hoping that with all that is happening, you remain motivated. I hope that you remain optimistic. There's a lot that's happening around us these days, right? But I do want to say, and again, this is why when I'm thinking about DEI, I try to make sure it's rooted in data. I try to make sure it's rooted in a sense of being very practical, right? Especially because I'm very much student facing. So these are some of the ways, these are some of the lens we have to bring to the work that we're doing, right? Because we know what's being said about the work that we do. It's important work. So we have to continue doing it. So have a great evening, everyone. And again, thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Jerome. Really appreciate having you here. Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. I hope to see you again in the future.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.